that when we practice yoga, whether we practice it as an individual philosophy or as a curative or preventative measure for others, it's important that we understand that there is a connection to what is said and what is done. In other words, it's important to walk the walk, so to speak. So let us begin by recognizing what many of you know that are teachers already. What is yoga? Yoga is the cessations of the turnings of the mind, and we know this as it was defined in the Yoga Sutras. As such, the practice of yoga uses many different awareness techniques to facilitate this objective. If we can think of how Krishnamacharya integrated his Ayurveda and yoga, we can think of yoga as being a process of replacing old patterns with new and more appropriate patterns. As Ayurveda counselors or practitioners, this is something that will have to be incorporated early on. In other words, the process of recognizing that certain things will have to be changed within the domain of people's habits. Being able to integrate new patterns or new habits to create new, more appropriate patterns may be the first step as a yoga therapist and an Ayurveda practitioner to incorporate change for our clients. With that being said, let's take a look at the psychological stages of behavior change. Step 1 is a pre-contemplation stage. This is a stage where people normally don't recognize that they need to change. If they do recognize that they need to change, they may be in a state of denial, or some people may not even want to change. If they recognize that they need to change, they may not want to. Some people may be ignorant to their state of poor health. Oftentimes this might take place, for instance, when a husband and wife come to your session together, whether it be Ayurveda or yoga therapy. Think of a husband and wife coming together to a session, and the wife is very amenable and very willing to take part in any changes that she needs to take place in. She's very willing to modify her diet and her daily rituals, and also she's very willing to implement any of the protocol changes that you suggest. And let's just say that towards the end of your session, the wife says to the husband something like this: well, you know, honey, it'd be really good for you too if you could get started. You're really overweight and your diarrhea recently has been just very hard to deal with. Wouldn't you agree? And he says, well, yeah, I've had some diarrhea lately, but it hasn't really been that bad. And then she goes on to say, well, that acid reflux that you've been dealing with for the last 2 years certainly has been uncomfortable. And how about your low back pain? Don't you think that this practitioner can help you? This yoga therapist, this Ayurveda counselor or practitioner can help you? Well, maybe she can help me, but I take my, my tablets that the doctor gave me, and that seems to help my acid reflux. And my low back pain, I've really gotten used to it. So you see, this is someone who's really unwilling to take place in the process of change. I'm going to say that it's probably not worth your time and effort. And I'm not mitigating the fact that everyone's worth time and effort, but someone who comes to you with this kind of an attitude probably will not see very many realizable differences, at least not many differences that will lead to changes in their behavior. People in this step 1 phase, it's agreed upon in the psychology field that they need more work. In other words, they need work that helps them recognize their miscomings or helps them to recognize that they do need help. In this case, a regular yoga practice would be suitable for a person in this stage. And why is that? Well, because a yoga practice really is intended to bring a higher state of awareness for the practitioner. And this could be any of the yoga practices. It doesn't have to be something that's even specific to the individual at this time. You'll begin to recognize that yoga therapy is definitely something that is used for the benefit of one person to help them move through difficulties of mind, body, or spirit. So in some sense, we could say, well, the step 1 person, we really can't help them. But on the other sense, if we could just in some way get this person who's in the step 1 phase of change into a group yoga class or maybe a group awareness class where they're taking place in a meditation, or maybe even if we could get them to journal with their spouse as a way to help them, as a way to help their spouse, not necessarily to help them. Oftentimes, these kinds of practices where people who are unwilling to change help others, they're able to, in a sense, go through the same process that those who they are helping. And in that process, they begin to affect change as well. So I hope this makes sense. Even though people are in this very initial stage of change, there's still something that we can do for them. But it's very important that we don't approach them with large tasks or large methodology for change, because studies show us, science shows us that they just don't work. The second stage is the contemplation stage, where we have awareness but no action. You know, I've been thinking of changing my diet. I've been thinking to come and see you for a long time, but I just can't make an appointment. I'm so busy. Maybe you're talking to someone at a party or a get-together. I really want to change, but there's always that, that stalling. Well, what do we do to help people in this phase? In this phase, it's also important to not only help them come to a greater sense of awareness through the general practice of yoga or from helping others, but it may be a good idea at this point to suggest that they make a plan for the future. Not an immediate plan, but something like this. Well, maybe if you don't mind, I will call you in a month to set up an appointment. This way, it isn't something that's very scary for them. They see it as something down the road that they can manage. Now, it's true that many of these people in the contemplation stage will continually put you off. In other words, you'll call them in a month to set up an appointment, and they'll say, well, I'm too busy, call me back in 2 weeks or 3 weeks. And I guess at this stage, it depends on whether this person is a close friend or relative. In other words, how much time and effort you want to spend on helping them move through these stages of change. The third step is someone who has already made a plan. This is like someone who's gone through their New Year's resolution and says, I am going to start my diet, so to speak, my Ayurvedic health plan on Monday, January 1st. I've already made an appointment with my Ayurveda counselor or practitioner, and it's in my calendar. These people are, of course, the people we normally see, but in our practice, in our private practice. However, even though they've come a long way from the pre-contemplation, contemplation, and the contemplation stage, they still haven't taken action within themselves. So studies tell us that there's still one of these people that's with the foot halfway in the door and halfway out. There is still a large failure rate among these people. And if we're thinking about the holistic modalities of yoga therapy and Ayurveda, it seems that the thing that matters most for them taking an action and actually practicing is the relationship between them and the practitioner. In other words, the kind of interaction you have with them on your first visit, or the ease, the way you make it easy for them to integrate any lifestyle changes. And in that being said, you learn that in the Ayurveda and yoga therapy, it's best to give little changes at a time. Dumping a whole load on them at first won't work out for yoga therapy or Ayurveda. Step 4, of course, we talk about that taking action process. And this is where they're right in the thick of things, practicing on a daily basis. Many times I'll give clients just one thing to do. One of my favorite yoga therapy postures to give is, I think I said last time, is Dvipada Viparita Karini, 2 legs up the wall pose. It seems that taking this posture would be really easy, wouldn't it? Just putting your legs up the wall for a minute, 1 minute a day. However, most people don't adhere to this kind of a schedule, even when it's easy. And so again, this step 4 in this behavioral change process has a second element, and that element again is you as the practitioner or the therapist. You as the yoga therapist, you're keeping them accountable is going to be really important. And this may take into account texting them, sending them emails, asking them to send you texts or emails when they've completed their daily 1 minute of meditation, of pranayama, of asana, whatever it is. The 5th step is the maintenance stage. This is when someone has integrated the changes you've asked of them into their lifestyle. And it normally takes, many of you know, at least a month to develop this kind of a habit, a ritual. And so if they've stuck to it over the course of about a month, again, studies tell us that we'll have a greater success rate. So within that 1 month period, the biggest question as yoga therapist, my biggest therapist to you, is are you willing to do the hard work for your clients? Are you willing to be in there of continued support? These are the kinds of questions that I think are important for you to ask of yourself each moment that you go in with a new client. And so even when we make it through these stages of change, there's a high relapse rate. Studies show that 1 year and 5 years later, that many people relapse. And these just aren't studies on people that are trying to quit things like smoking or drinking. It's also the same statistical variation for people who implement any kind of new lifestyle change. So I think this is a really interesting thing to contemplate before we go into a full aspect of yoga therapy, a full recognition of what yoga therapy entails. Really, it entails that you're ready to do the hard work, and it entails that you meet your client at a place where they're most ready to start, and that you can give them the tools if they're not ready to start without, I'll say, nagging them or pressuring them. It really is a lot of work. Any questions? I'm very open to taking questions or comments. So changing behavior with yoga begins with, sorry, I'm going to mute just until the dogs stop barking. Okay, thank you for your patience. We have 4 wonderful, lively Chihuahuas in the home. And I don't know if you've heard it said before, but many people believe that when dogs bark, that is a truthful, something that's, whatever you're hearing is in truth. So I hope you'll take what I'm saying as a truthful message as well. So let's look at how we'll change behavior with yoga. It begins with the physical body for most people. Most people aren't necessarily interested in meditation right off the bat or pranayama on their first session. Many people that you'll come into contact with for yoga therapy may not even know what yoga is. Especially, they may not even know what any of the other limbs of yoga are. So they'll come to you really with a physical mindset and perspective. So the biggest thing to recognize here is in changing behavior with yoga, that it isn't necessarily, yes, it is, the specific asana, but more importantly, it's whether the individual is ready to do the hard work. Again, tapas, whether they're ready to cultivate the heat that brings about change. Tapas is essential for change. This tapas can come through a physical sweating, literally, and it may have to be something as easy as asking them to take maybe a sweating therapy, the svedana, in either a sauna or a steam room. This can affect change. Why is it? It's believed in the philosophy and practice of yoga that this burning away of impurities through sweating helps us realize not only a difference within our physical being, but within our mind, emotional, and spirit being as well. So you'll see changing behavior with yoga really takes on many things. And we're just talking about the physical practice for now. When we look at the mental body or the intellect, we might also think of ways that we can integrate change in our clients where they look inward. For this reason, I like to integrate journaling And sometimes even a method that's very widely used now in mental health is art therapy. Even sound therapy with a journaling session after. So what would this mean? It would mean that you might give the client a question, something like this: how would you feel, or can you imagine how you would feel without the back pain that you're currently experiencing? And ask them to write, draw, or even express it in music, something that's creative in nature. This is really important because it takes into account both sides of the brain. In other words, it takes into account the creative and the analytical parts of the brain. This is an important practice for behavioral change. When we look at the emotional or spiritual body, we might think of Ishvara Pranidhana, or recognizing a consciousness outside of ourselves. We have to be careful because when we recognize this entity or energy outside of ourselves, many people don't relate to this as being divinity. In other words, many people don't relate to this as being God-centered. And the practice of yoga, it's a good thing, is a dualist philosophy. In other words, there's one side of yoga that defined by Patanjali's yoga definitely says that there is a God outside of us, and there is a right and a wrong, so to speak, and that we surrender to that higher being in our practice. But then the yoga of the Upanishads is really a teacher-student philosophy, and it's based on knowing, sensing, and feeling that this divine energy is in all beings and in all, not only sentient beings, but in all matter and spirit. So we're tied to this cosmos, not just to an entity, a divinity. So we should be able to make room. What I'm saying here is it's important to make room for both sides of the coin. How would you approach that with a client? Maybe I'll leave that for you for a discussion on the forum. How do you approach people to change the behavior? From a God-centered perspective and a non-dualist perspective for those that don't recognize a religion. It really does take a lot of internal work as a yoga therapist. So, tapaha, svadhyaya, ishvara pranidham, kriya yogaha. Here in Sutra 1 of the second pada, we learn that the simple life is attained through discernment and not through extremes necessarily. We also learn that svadhyaya, that internal practice, really comes from just asking the question, who am I and do I like myself? Do I feel good about my health right now? Ishvara Pranidhana is the understanding that emotional maturity is based in faith, and reminding you that everyone's faith can be very different, especially from our own. So the theory of yoga and practice relies again on tapas, to detox the body. This comes from lifestyle choices mainly, and from nurturing the senses. It also comes about from purity of mind, being connected to a higher entity, not necessarily as separate from ourselves, but having that realization that we are part of a bigger fabric. So, seeing the yoga in action, so to speak, let's integrate it into the process of empowering individuals towards improved health and well-being. We can do this if we think of yoga therapy being defined as the application of yogic principles to our particular person with the objective of achieving a particular spiritual, psychological, or physiological goal. I think the key parts to this is that we recognize that it is an application of yogic principles. It may be an integration of any of the 8 limbs. It is important to recognize that it is most of the time an individual practice. In other words, we're normally dealing with one person at a time. I think it would not be a good thing if you left out the idea that it is to achieve a spiritual, psychological, or physiological goal. And in my sense, I think they're integrated as one. I don't think you can separate one from the other. So the purpose of yoga therapy is to balance the 5 Vayus, to balance Agni, and to balance the flow of energy in Sushumna, Ida, and Pingala Nadi. The 5 Vayus, Prana, Udana, Vyana, Samana, and Apana, take into account an exploration of 5 actions, so to speak. We can think of the respiration, prana. Our vital force is normally recognized through the breathing process. Udana Vayu, we can think of this as a process or an expression of our voice, an expression of our words. Vyana Vayu, we can think of this as, well, when we cultivate a good connection between our mind heart and our physical heart, we can cultivate a good aura, a good presence within ourselves, and one that permeates to the whole of the world. Integrating Samana Vayu, we recognize that digestion is important. In this aspect, many of the pranayama and asana practice help us with this. And we'll discuss some of these in a later lecture. In regards to exhalation and evacuation, Apanavayu, we take into account evacuation and exhalation. Oftentimes, this is an important aspect of people when they come to us with low back pain and they're experiencing constipation as well. So integrating a practice that helps them balance Apanavayu through breathing rituals can help with not only back pain, but then also the constipation. Udana-vayu, we want to think about an integration. If we move back to Udana, we can think about an integration. Remember, that's around the neck. We want to think about an integration of our voice, our intellect, and our physical body. If we think about it as a, as an amalgamation of our higher self and our lower self, if we can think of our lower self as being our physical body, we can integrate balance at Udana Vayu when we have merged the two. In other words, our actions of our physical body are integrated with our higher learning spirit as well. So balancing Agni, we know that there are 13 biological fires. You'll learn about, or many of you may already know about Tikshagni, Mandagni, and Vishamagni. The main thing to recognize here is that in my practice as a yoga therapist, I believe breathing practices and asana are the two things that bring nearly immediate change. Nearly immediate change. In other words, someone who comes to me with Tikshagni, twisting postures are usually the first thing I'll go to. Someone with Mandagni would do very well to put legs up the wall with wide legs. And Vishamagni, child's pose, would be very wonderful to kind of close it all in. Usually, people, as I said, will have immediate results. In other words, they feel better just about immediately. At least that's been my experience with clients. So let's move into nadis. Nadis, remember, comes from the root nad, which means motion. And it's believed there are 72,000 different nadis. These channels or pathways is what energy flows through. The main ones that we're going to focus on tonight are Ida, Pingala, and Sushumna. Ida begins from the junction of Muladhara Chakra and Sushumna Nadi. It's the channel for the energy of Apana. It's lunar and tamasic. So as a lunar quality, this means that it's dull and cold, very watery. It's tamasic. Again, the dull energy. Tamas is associated often with depression. However, when this channel on the left side of our body, or the left nostril as well, is purified, it allows us to have a restful sleep. When imbalanced, it can lead to deep attachment, rigidity, conditional love, and melancholy. So last week we talked a little bit about holding pranayama. I think you may have remembered that, holding an exhale. And someone asked, well, why would holding an exhale not be good for constipation, or be cooling, or not be so good for vata? And that is because the energy on the exhale is really apana vayu energy. It's energy that's centered in that lunar and tamasic quality. Pingala, the right side of the face and body. This channel is highly, highly solar. This means it's heating. It's very rajastic, which means very forward thinking in the mental quality, very aggressive quality. It's associated with male energy. It's very good when purified, but not so good when it's imbalanced. We can have intense heated emotion or great swings of passionate energy. We may get, again, things like the acid reflux, pain in the stomach, liver imbalances. So this is the energy contained in the inhale and in the right side of the body. So I'll stop here to say that oftentimes a very easy practice is just to ask people, for instance, who are heavily vata, to lie on their left side. This will subtly soften this nadi, the left channel, Ida. Pingala, say someone is heavily pitta, we could ask them to lie on the right side during the therapy session, or even as a protocol at night, or for a minute a day, whatever it is that you feel your client can handle. The last channel we'll talk about is Sushumna Nadi. It's the main nadi that mirrors the spine line. When imbalanced, it leads to dullness, ignorance, and decreased awareness. It also leads to oversensitivity to stimuli and heightened awareness. It can lead to paranoia, hallucinations, and even insanity. For this reason, I think it is imperative that we do not give forward folding as yoga therapy. In other words, as a prescription to take home. If you're doing a forward fold with client in a private setting, that's a different story. But I recommend, in order to keep Sushumna Nadi straight, and at least to start to integrate a sense of balance, that it's really important to give postures where people are mostly lying down on their back, or postures like child's pose, which have very little room for error. So cultivating or clearing the nadis are cultivated in two ways. We can think of the Shat karmas, or the 6 karmas. We talked about them very superficially last time, and here I'd like to talk about them just a little bit. They incorporate using neti, the neti pot, incorporate dauti, or cleansing the digestive. Sometimes yogis would be able to squat in a big vat of water, for instance, and take up a gauze or water through the anal passageway and then let it release again. And or taking gauze down through the mouth into the esophagus and even further down, and either inducing purgation or just cleansing the passageway in general. Another technique is called nali, or abdominal churning, a very advanced yogic pranayama, which involves moving the muscles of the belly in a churning, rolling fashion. And then basti, or the colon cleanse, where oil or waters, sometimes with herbs, is introduced into the colon to cleanse the colon. Then kapalbhati, for purification of the senses and the digestive. Kapalbhati is maybe one of the most, I want to say intense, but that's not really what I mean, but one of the most complete cleansing processes. And if done properly, can be very easy to accomplish on a daily basis. It's very important that vatas do not practice this during the fall or early spring. And that's because Kapalbhati is very airy. Trataka, or the gazing. Remember that gazing at a flame or gazing at anything to make the eyes water. So if one of the goals of yoga therapy, remember the goals of yoga therapy are to balance the Vayus, balance Agni, and then to balance and or clear the nadis. If one of the ways or one of the goals is to clear the nadis, well, then we know that these Shat karmas, the 6 actions, will do it. But I don't know too many people that would adhere to that abdominal churning or any of the digestive cleanses. Many people find it hard to even do a neti pot on a daily basis. For this reason, I'm going to suggest rituals that help the individual place their mind in a sattvic place. And these are simple rituals. It's awareness rituals. Just taking time to slow the mind. It can be just inviting your client to sit in a space of calm with you for a minute or two. I remember having a young client that I had as a yoga therapy client since he was 8 years old. And I had him as my client until he was 18 and went away to college. 2 days a week, I would see him. He had severe ADHD. And he came in one day and he was angry, really angry. And he said, I don't want to do this. I'm not practicing yoga. Our sessions were only a half an hour. His mother had already dropped him off and left. And I said, okay, we'll just sit here. And we sat on our cushions for a half an hour. And he was quiet and centered and calm and relaxed. So begin with me to breathe in and sense and feel that you are aware of your body. Tell yourself that you can calm your whole body. And breathing out, tell yourself, I'm aware of my mental formations. I can make my mind happy. And breathing in, tell yourself that you can observe letting go and that you can release all desire. And one more time, soft and slow, breathing in. And exhale, breathing out. In this process of yoga therapy, the main thing I hope you're able to recognize is that you are sattvic. When you're in a state of sattva balance, you can more readily help others to achieve the same. In our second half of lecture, we'll begin in about a minute or two, so if you'd like to take a small break, now's the time.